All right. My name is Paul Plantinga. I'm at Monash University, the South Africa campus. So I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I'm doing research largely around policy around ICTs in developing countries. I have a general interest though in ICT and development from a community level all the way through to policy level. So that's why I'm here, partly because we work on some projects around NGOs, ICTs in communities, but then also because I'm interested in ICT policy in developing countries. Yeah.
So yesterday you presented a paper on ICT research by Africans.
Yes.
So could you please talk a bit about that paper and the outcomes?
Okay. The idea originated when a group of us met at another conference actually. Three of us, the one lady is a Kenyan, the other is actually Canadian but based in South Africa, and myself I'm in Johannesburg, South African. And we had noticed in some of our interactions at conferences that there was not much African research or commentary by Africans necessarily in the ICTD field, and there were a lot of comments made by people from outside Africa about ICTD research in Africa. So we thought it's probably a good time to start reflecting on what Africans are doing in the ICTD field. And so the first idea was really to just do a very superficial look at what Africans' contribution have been to the ICTD field over the last 20 years, really, by looking just at the digital archives, digital libraries of what research has been done. So that was just to give us an indication of what Africans' contribution was, and the percentage was fairly low, as we probably expected. So that was less than 10%, 9% of the publications in the field. And then we decided we wanted to explore a bit more around what Africans are wanting to, what they're researching, and I think the idea is to take it further and to see if what Africans are wanting to research is aligned with what everyone else is researching in the ICTD field. The differences between what they're doing, also differences in methodology. Are Africans more oriented to using, say, participatory approaches, or what are they doing anything unusual in the field? So this first paper was kind of a first fairly superficial look at things, with the idea of maybe taking it further. It just started out of an informal interaction, really, around what Africans were doing.
And for this conference here, do you see African research by Africans represented?
To some extent. Not really, though. I mean, there's a strong representation, especially in the main sessions from the US. Actually, to be honest, there probably hasn't been a lot. I mean, the majority have probably come from Berkeley and Washington. And it's not to say that it's bad. It's those things are very useful, and I don't think as Africans we should reject those things. It's just about developing indigenous research and kind of that self-determination and that self-respect among Africans, and it's also an African research community that's needed to engage with what's coming from outside. But it hasn't been a huge presence here, but I think there's been space created for at least Africans to participate through the scholarships, which has been very significant. So.
What is your observation on how is the work of African researchers, how has it changed since the emergence of new ICT?
I think the one thing is that maybe we tend to follow what's popular in the other universities globally, so we'll pick up on things. For example, ICTs and climate change is becoming popular, so I was speaking to a university research director in South Africa recently, and he was saying that they now want to start working on climate change related topics. So it seems, in my opinion, like we tend to follow what's happening globally without kind of defining our own problems or identifying problems, and then there's no doubt climate change is important, but it probably is important, but it doesn't seem like it's emerging from within our own institutions or from our interactions locally, especially universities, because universities have global interaction to a large extent instead of interacting with their neighboring communities. So I think more of the ideas for research are coming from external sources often rather than from the interaction regionally.
And do you see a tendency of African researchers to come together and do stuff together now more than former times, or?
Yeah, I think there is more effort, and obviously ICTs are an important enabler of it. For example, we have tried, and we've worked on some community things around just email communications on mailing lists, that kind of thing. The CPR Africa conferences, I'm oriented to policy, so CPR Africa is a policy conference, and that's a very significant effort to bring ICT policy makers from South Africa and the rest of Africa together. The next one's in Kenya, I believe. So that's quite a significant thing. I think it's funded by the IDRC, as far as I know. So there are efforts, and I think we mentioned a couple in the paper, but Kathleen would be able to explain that a bit more. So there are efforts to build a network of African researchers that are relatively new. It was only started really last year.
So what about your experiences in the conference? Could you network well with other African researchers?
Yeah, we were just actually talking about that today. Most of the comments following our paper were from non-Africans, the interactions we've had. So we were just talking about it via email today with my other co-authors about we really need to connect everyone together at this conference, especially because we haven't had much interaction with other Africans about the paper. Obviously we have existing connections, but surprisingly there's been more interest from outside of, although that's just my experience, maybe Shuko and Kathleen have noticed more. So but that's something we were just talking about doing is maybe formalizing some of those connections, or I don't know, building on some momentum around it. Yeah.
So great things to come.
Well,
It's worth coming.
yes, yeah. And then there's other, and then obviously we have other research interests. This one was
Extend on
one.
that a bit.
Sorry?
You want to extend on these other research interests?
Yeah, from my side, I'm just generally I'm interested in deepening the critical thinking around ICTs and ICT governance. So my specific research is around subnational or local governance of ICTs and what regional governments at a subnational level are trying to do around shaping the ICT sector within their regions. And these things have only really started in the last maybe 3 or 4 years in the especially the more marginalized areas of South Africa. So my interest is in looking at that, and there's an agenda behind it is how more and more people are starting to think about what, firstly, aside from just the rollout of infrastructure, are they thinking about how ICTs can be used more effectively, and what the impact will be on their society and the people around them, rather than just accepting that the mobile operators will roll out a network. Rather, how can we use this more effectively, and how can it benefit different groups of people, and what are the negative implications, and so that kind of thing. So it's deeper, because in developing countries, the ICT knowledge and the ICT governance is often very heavily centralized by the national government, for example. So it's just to extend that to deeper, to a more local levels, that more people are thinking critically about how ICTs are used. So that's the agenda behind my research, but it's fairly early still.
And do you feel that is something which is changing also? More people are more critical now, or?
Yeah, they are, and I think they recognize some more of the weaknesses of or the dangers around ICTs. And there's some unfortunate things around that in many countries. I guess there's a lot of blocking of certain BlackBerry services, things like that. So there's some negative sides to it, but then But then it's also critical in thinking about how it can be better used or applied in a context. So it's not critical in a negative sense, it's critical in the sense that it's how it can be better used to suit the context. So that they seem to be in my research, they definitely seem to be thinking about that, and they recognize a need to customize policies. They don't just agree with the national policy, which is unusual sometimes in a developing country. The national government is often seen as the beginning and the end of things, so you're not allowed to really customize things for your region necessarily, but they're definitely determined to do that, which is a good thing, I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for this much information. And
Okay.